Chapter 1. The Trial. She Never Wanted to Win. The Luna trial grounds reeked of anticipation and pine sap, a combination that made Sarah Whitlock's stomach churn. She stood at the edge of the clearing, wrapped in the ceremonial white dress that marked her as a candidate, a willing participant in this archaic ritual. Except she wasn't willing. Not even close. Around her, 12 other women preened and stretched, their eyes gleaming with ambition. They wanted this. They'd trained for years to compete for the honor of becoming Luna to the Silvercrest Pack's Alpha. Sarah had trained too, but for an entirely different purpose: to fail spectacularly enough that no pack would ever consider her worthy again. "You look pale," whispered Mara, the only friend Sarah had made in the 3 weeks leading up to this moment. Sarah forced a tight smile. Nervous didn't begin to cover it. Terrified was closer. Not of the trial itself, the obstacle courses, strength tests, and tactical challenges designed to prove a woman's worthiness to stand beside an alpha. No, Sarah was terrified of succeeding. Because success meant becoming Luna. And becoming Luna meant being bound forever to a pack, to a mate, to a life she'd watched destroy her mother piece by piece. The memory flashed unbidden. Her mother's hollow eyes, the way she'd faded into nothing after her mate's death, as if the bond had drained every ounce of life from her bones. The healers called it mate sickness. Sarah called it a prison sentence. Never again. Not for her. A horn bellowed across the grounds, silencing the crowd of hundreds who'd gathered to watch. Sarah's breath caught as a figure emerged from the forest line, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Alpha Tobias Silvercrest, the male every woman here hoped to impress. Sarah had seen him before during the preliminary ceremonies, but always from a distance. Up close, he was even more imposing, dark hair pulled back, angular features, eyes like storm clouds. Handsome, certainly. Powerful, undoubtedly. And absolutely not for her. "Welcome, candidates," Tobias said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the clearing. "Today you prove your strength, your cunning, and your worth. The Luna of Silvercrest must be more than beautiful." The women around Sarah stood straighter, chests out, eager. Sarah slouched deliberately. "But know this," Tobias continued, and something in his tone made Sarah's attention sharpen. "I will know if you're hiding your true nature. I will see through any deception." His eyes swept across the candidates, and for one heart-stopping moment they landed on Sarah. She could have sworn something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Suspicion? But then he moved on, and she convinced herself she'd imagined it. The first trial began within minutes, a race through the forest obstacle course. The route was brutal: fallen logs, rope climbs, mud pits designed to slow even the strongest competitors. Sarah deliberately stumbled at the third obstacle, letting half the pack overtake her. She misjudged a jump across a ravine, landing hard enough to bruise but not injure. She moved slowly through the mud pit while others powered through. By the time she crossed the finish line, she was second to last. Perfect. Except when she looked up, gasping for breath, she found Tobias watching her with an expression that made her blood run cold. Not disappointment, not disgust. Interest. "Unlucky run," he said, approaching her while the other candidates clustered near the water stations. Sarah kept her eyes down, playing the role of humble failure. "Strange. Your form on the rope climb was flawless." His voice was casual, but she heard the steel beneath it. Sarah's pulse hammered. He circled her slowly, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical touch. "You're stronger. I can smell it on you." Before she could respond, another horn sounded, calling them to the second trial. Tobias walked away, leaving Sarah frozen in place, panic clawing up her throat. He knew, somehow, impossibly, he knew. The second trial was worse. A test of tactical thinking, candidates had to defend a mock territory against simulated attacks. Sarah deliberately left gaps in her defenses, made obvious mistakes in her strategy. But when the evaluators announced the results, confusion rippled through the crowd. Seventh? She'd tried to fail completely. How was she in seventh? "Your mistakes were strategic," a voice said behind her, and she spun to find Tobias standing there again, closer than before. Too close. She could smell him now, cedarwood and something wilder, something that made her instincts scream danger. You left gaps that looked like errors but were actually traps. 3 attackers fell for them. She met his eyes for the first time, and the world seemed to tilt. They weren't gray up close. They were silver, gleaming with an intelligence that saw far too much. And something else. Something that made her skin prickle with awareness she absolutely did not want to feel. No one, Alpha. The word was soft, almost amused, but it hit like a blow. Before she could retreat, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not hard but firm enough to keep her in place. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm. You came here to fail, he said quietly. His words meant only for her. But you're too well trained to fail convincingly. So let me make something clear. I don't want a Luna who hides what she is. His grip tightened fractionally. And I will have it. He released her and walked away, leaving Sarah standing there with her wrist burning and her carefully constructed plan crumbling around her. Because Alpha Tobias Silvercrest had just seen through every lie she'd prepared, and instead of rejecting her, he looked intrigued. Chapter 2. The Alpha Who Saw Too Much. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay in the candidate quarters, staring at the wooden ceiling while moonlight filtered through the curtains and the other women whispered excitedly about the day's events. Mara had placed fourth. Others had impressed the pack elders. But all anyone could talk about was how Alpha Tobias had spent an unusual amount of time speaking with the girl who'd nearly failed. Someone whispered. In Whitlock, she barely made it through. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to block them out. Tomorrow was the third trial, combat assessment. She'd have to throw matches, pull punches, make herself look weak and incompetent. Easy enough, except now Tobias would be watching, looking for the cracks in her performance, searching for the truth she couldn't afford to give him. Her wrist still tingled where he'd touched her. She rubbed it absently, annoyed at her body's traitorous response. The problem was that Tobias Silvercrest was exactly the kind of alpha her mother had warned her about. Not cruel or domineering, those types were easy to resist. No, Tobias was dangerous because he was intelligent, perceptive, and seemingly interested in more than just a beautiful trophy Luna. He wanted someone real, someone honest. Which meant Sarah was precisely the wrong woman for him. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to pre-dawn gray light and the sound of movement outside. Sarah dressed quickly in the training clothes provided, fitted pants and a sleeveless tunic that allowed full range of motion, and stepped outside. The training grounds were empty except for one figure moving through combat forms in the center of the ring. Tobias. Sarah should have turned around, should have gone back inside and waited for the official summons. Instead, she found herself walking closer, drawn by the lethal grace of his movements. He fought an invisible opponent, his body flowing from one strike to the next with devastating precision. This wasn't the civilized alpha who'd addressed them yesterday. This was the warrior beneath, the predator who'd earned his position through blood and dominance. He spun suddenly, eyes locking on her. Sarah froze. His voice was rough, like he'd been training for hours. No, Alpha. He grabbed a towel, wiping sweat from his face and neck. The movement drew her attention to the strong column of his throat, the way his training shirt clung to his shoulders. Sarah jerked her gaze away. Interesting. It wasn't a request. Tobias tossed the towel aside and gestured to the ring. Sarah's stomach dropped. He moved to the center of the ring, rolling his shoulders. Fight me. No audience, no judges, no need for pretense. Just you and me. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. But refusing would be suspicious, and some reckless part of her, the part she'd spent years trying to bury, wanted to show him, wanted to prove she was more than the failure she was pretending to be. She stepped into the ring. They circled each other slowly. Tobias moved like water, balanced and ready. Sarah kept her stance deliberately sloppy, her guard low. He attacked. Muscle memory overrode thought. Sarah blocked his strike, countered with a palm thrust to his solar plexus, pulled at the last second so it only tapped him instead of driving the air from his lungs. But it was enough. Tobias's eyes widened fractionally before his expression shifted into something hungry. Again, he said. This time he didn't hold back. He came at her with the speed and strength of an alpha, testing her reflexes, her training, her limits. And Sarah, caught between self-preservation and the intoxicating freedom of finally moving without restraint, fought back. She dodged, blocked, struck. Her body remembered every lesson her father had drilled into her before he died, every technique she'd practiced in secret. She was fast, faster than most shifters, her father had said, gifted with reflexes that shouldn't exist in a human. For 90 seconds, she forgot to hide. Then Tobias swept her legs. She hit the ground hard, and suddenly he was there, pinning her wrists above her head, his body covering hers. They were both breathing hard, faces inches apart. "There you are," he said softly. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, could smell cedarwood and sweat, and something else. Something wild that called to a part of her she didn't understand. His eyes had darkened to pewter, intense and searching. "Let me go," she whispered. His grip on her wrists tightened. His voice dropped lower, rough with something that sounded like frustration. "From the moment you stepped onto these grounds, I felt—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "You're hiding something." Sarah's pulse hammered in her throat. He was too close, too warm, too everything. He leaned closer, and she felt his breath against her lips. "Then why is your heart racing? Why do you smell like fear and longing and—" He inhaled deeply, and his eyes flashed with something that made her gasp. But Tobias was already pulling away, releasing her wrists and backing up like she'd burned him. His expression had shifted from hungry to shocked, and something that looked almost like panic. "The trial starts in an hour," he said, his voice carefully neutral. He left the ring without looking back, moving faster than a human should be able to move. Sarah lay there for a long moment, her wrists tingling, her body still humming from proximity to him. What had he sensed? What had made him retreat so suddenly? And why did some traitorous part of her wish he'd stayed? Chapter 3: Bloodlines and Broken Rules. The combat trial was designed to be brutal. Each candidate would face off against a pack warrior in hand-to-hand combat while the entire pack watched. It wasn't about winning. No human could defeat a shifter in a fair fight. It was about courage, strategy, and how gracefully you handled defeat. Sarah's plan had been simple: lose quickly and without distinction. But as she stood in the candidate line watching the matches before hers, she felt Tobias's eyes burning into her from his position on the raised platform. He sat flanked by his beta, Cade, and the pack elders, but his attention never wavered from her. She was in trouble. Mara went forth, lasting an impressive 2 minutes against her opponent before yielding with dignity. The crowd applauded her effort. 2 other candidates followed, each giving respectable performances. Then the announcer called Sarah's name. Her opponent was a female warrior named Rhea, all lean muscle and predatory confidence. As Sarah stepped into the ring, she caught Tobias leaning forward in his seat. The referee shouted. Rhea attacked immediately, testing Sarah's defenses with a flurry of strikes. Sarah blocked clumsily, let herself get pushed back, stumbled. "Stop holding back, candidate," Rhea growled, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Sarah's eyes widened. The warrior had sensed it too. But before she could respond, Rhea pressed the attack, faster now, more aggressive. Sarah had no choice but to defend properly or get seriously hurt. She blocked, redirected, created distance. The crowd murmured. This wasn't the same girl who'd fumbled through the obstacle course. "Better," Rhea said with a sharp smile. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Rhea had been watching, or Tobias had told her. Either way, her cover was completely blown. Fine. If she couldn't hide anymore, she'd at least go down fighting. Sarah shifted her stance, dropping the pretense. When Rhea attacked again, Sarah met her head-on, blocking, striking, using leverage and speed to compensate for the warrior's superior strength. She wouldn't win, but she'd make it a fight worth watching. 3 minutes in, the crowd was roaring. Sarah had landed several solid hits, and while Rhea was clearly still in control, it was closer than any previous match. Sarah's lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't since her father died. Then Rhea swept her legs, and Sarah hit the ground. The warrior's hand was at her throat in an instant, the universal sign of defeat in pack combat. But as Rhea pinned her, she leaned close enough to whisper, "The Alpha's eyes haven't left you once." The referee called the match. Rhea released her and offered a hand up, which Sarah took. As they bowed to each other, Sarah risked a glance at the platform. Tobias was standing now, his expression unreadable, but his hands gripped the railing hard enough that she could see the tension in his shoulders even from this distance. She'd just made everything so much worse. The summons came an hour after the trial ended. A young pack member appeared at the candidate quarters, his eyes respectfully averted. Sarah Whitlock, the Alpha requests your presence in his private study. The other candidates went silent. Being summoned alone was unprecedented. Mara squeezed Sarah's hand as she passed. Sarah followed the messenger through the pack house, a sprawling lodge built into the mountainside. They climbed 2 flights of stairs to a wing she hadn't been allowed to enter before. The messenger stopped at a heavy oak door. The young man retreated quickly, as if he didn't want to be anywhere near whatever was about to happen. Sarah knocked. The study was lined with books and smelled of leather and old paper. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Tobias stood with his back to her, staring out the window at the darkening forest. "Close the door," he said, without turning around. She did, her heart hammering. Her heart. "I've been alpha of this pack for 6 years," Tobias began, his voice carefully controlled. "In that time, I've overseen 3 Luna trials. I've watched ambitious women, cunning women, powerful women compete for the position, but I have never—" He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. He held up a hand. "Don't lie to me again. I've tolerated it until now because I wanted to understand why. But after this morning, after watching you fight Rhea—" He moved closer, and Sarah forced herself not to retreat. "I need the truth, Sarah." She lifted her chin. "My father, Marcus Whitlock." Tobias's words hit like a physical blow. "Yes, I know. I looked into your background after yesterday." Sarah's throat tightened. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "But here's what I really don't understand. Your father was exiled for refusing to force his daughter into a mate bond she didn't want. He gave up everything to protect your freedom." The question hung between them, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to face. "I had no choice," she whispered finally. "My father made enemies when he left Nightshade, powerful enemies who've spent 20 years looking for leverage against him when he died last year." Her voice cracked. She steadied it. "His debts became mine." Tobias's expression darkened. "The kind that require a blood bond. So I made a deal, enter the Luna trials, prove myself unmarriageable by failing spectacularly, and the debt would be forgiven. Everyone wins. The pack gets entertainment, I get freedom, and—" She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. Tobias's voice had dropped to something dangerous. Before she could answer, a howl split the night, long, mournful, and far too close to the pack house. Then another and another. Sarah recognized the pattern, felt ice flood her veins. Tobias's head snapped toward the window, his entire body going rigid. A voice boomed from outside, amplified somehow to carry through the entire territory. "I invoke ancient right!" Sarah's legs nearly gave out. "No, not yet, not now." Tobias turned to her, his eyes blazing silver. "Who is my debt holder?" she breathed. She met his gaze, letting him see her fear. "And he didn't come here for money, Tobias." Chapter 4. The Claim and the Counterclaim. Tobias moved to the window with predatory speed, his shoulders rigid as he stared down at the torchlit gathering forming in the courtyard below. Sarah could see the shift in him, the civilized alpha receding, replaced by something far more primal. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the door. The word escaped before she could stop it. When he turned, eyes flashing dangerously, she forced herself to continue. "He'll use pack law against you. Kieran knows every loophole, every ancient right." Tobias studied her for a long moment. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "My father refused to let Kieran mate bond me to his son when I turned 18. That's why Marcus was exiled. He challenged Kieran's authority and lost. The debt was the punishment." Tobias's voice held no judgment, only a sharp intelligence working through the implications. "I thought if I proved myself worthless as a potential Luna, unmarriageable to any respectable pack, Kieran would have no use for me. The contract stated I had to attempt the trials." She laughed bitterly. Something that might have been admiration flickered in his expression before his features hardened again. "Come. If Kieran invoked ancient right, the entire pack will bear witness." He opened the door, but before they could leave, he caught her arm, gently this time, nothing like the commanding grip from before. "Sarah, whatever happens down there, Whatever he claims, know this. You are on my territory now, under my protection. The words should have felt like another cage. Instead, they felt like a lifeline. The courtyard was packed with pack members, their eyes gleaming in the torchlight, the air thick with tension and the musk of agitated shifters. Sarah followed Tobias down the main steps, acutely aware of every gaze that tracked her movement. The other Luna candidates stood clustered to one side, Mara's face pale with worry. At the center of the courtyard stood Alpha Kieran Ashwood. He was older than Tobias by perhaps 15 years, silver threading through his dark hair, but age had only sharpened his dangerous edge. Two enforcers flanked him, large, scarred men who watched the Silvercrest pack with barely concealed aggression. Kieran's smile was all teeth as Tobias approached. Alpha Silvercrest. Kieran's voice dripped with false courtesy. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but time is of the essence. Tobias spoke the word like a curse. You're on my territory, Ashwood. Kieran's eyes found Sarah, and she felt his gaze like oil on her skin. 20 years ago, Marcus Whitlock swore a blood oath to my pack as compensation for his betrayal. The terms were clear. His bloodline would serve Nightshade for 3 generations. Marcus is dead. He smiled wider. Murmurs rippled through the Silvercrest pack. Sarah's stomach turned. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it horrifyingly real. That's an outdated practice, Cade, Tobias's beta, spoke up from beside his alpha. Blood oaths haven't been enforceable for 50 years, yes. Kieran pulled a rolled parchment from his coat, the paper yellowed with age. Marcus Whitlock's signature, witnessed by 3 alpha witnesses, acknowledging his crime and accepting punishment, all legal. He held it out toward Tobias. Tobias took the document, his jaw tight as he scanned it. Sarah watched his expression darken with each line. When he looked up, his eyes had gone completely silver, his wolf barely contained. This is barbaric, Tobias said flatly. Kieran shrugged. Now if you'll kindly release Sarah Whitlock to my custody, we'll be on our way, unless, his smile turned predatory, you wish to challenge the oath? That would require compensation of equal or greater value, perhaps a territorial concession? It was a trap. Sarah saw it clearly now. Kieran had waited until she was on Silvercrest territory, surrounded by witnesses, so that Tobias's only options were to surrender her or pay an impossible price. Either way, Kieran won. There is another option, Tobias said quietly. The courtyard went silent. Even Kieran's smirk faltered slightly. Tobias turned to Sarah, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Ancient law states that a blood oath can be superseded by a mate bond. He moved closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear his next words. I know this isn't what you want. I know it's another cage. But if you accept, the oath becomes void. And bound to you instead, she whispered. His eyes searched hers. But I'm offering you a choice, Sarah. Not demanding, not forcing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Accept meant survival, but sacrifice the freedom her father died protecting. Refuse meant becoming Kieran's prisoner, mate bonded to his son, trapped in the pack that had destroyed her family. Some choice. But as she looked at Tobias, really looked at him, she saw something that hadn't been there in Kieran's eyes. Respect. And beneath it, something fiercer, something that called to the broken parts of her she'd been trying to bury. It ends. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, which means you'd technically fail, wouldn't you? Despite everything, despite the impossible situation, Sarah almost laughed. He understood. Even now he was trying to give her what she'd been fighting for. She looked at Kieran, saw the anticipation in his eyes, the certainty that he'd won. Then she looked back at Tobias and made her choice. Tobias's eyes flared, and before she could process what was happening, he pulled her against him, one hand cupping the back of her neck. This will hurt, he murmured against her ear. Then he bit down on the junction of her neck and shoulder, and Sarah's world exploded into silver fire. Chapter 5. The Bond That Should Not Exist. Pain lanced through Sarah's shoulder, white-hot and consuming, but beneath it surged something else entirely, a flood of sensation that had nothing to do with the physical bite. Images flashed behind her eyes, a forest at twilight, the taste of fresh snow, the sound of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Tobias's heartbeat. She could feel it thrumming through the connection, strong and steady and utterly overwhelming. Then the pain receded, replaced by a warmth that spread through her veins like liquid sunlight. Tobias released her neck, his tongue sweeping over the mark to seal it. The gesture should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like coming home. When Sarah opened her eyes, the world had changed. Everything was sharper, colors more vivid, sounds more distinct. She could hear the individual heartbeats of the pack members surrounding them, could smell the fierce sweat on Kieran's enforcers, could feel the earth beneath her feet humming with life. It was too much, too intense, and she swayed. Tobias caught her immediately, his arm around her waist. "I've got you," he murmured, and his voice resonated through her bones, through the new connection binding them together. "What?" Her own voice sounded strange to her ears. But Tobias had gone rigid against her, his entire body suddenly tense. When she looked up at his face, his expression was one of pure shock. Around them, the pack had erupted in gasps and excited whispers. Even Kieran looked stunned, his calculated composure finally cracking. "Impossible," Kieran breathed. Cade stepped forward, his eyes wide. Tobias's voice was rough, barely controlled. His arm tightened protectively around Sarah. "Everyone, clear the courtyard." "You can't hide this, Silvercrest," Kieran said, recovering his composure with visible effort. The entire pack witnessed it. The alpha command in Tobias's voice was absolute. Pack members scrambled to obey, disappearing into the lodge with backward glances. The Luna candidates fled. Even Kieran's enforcers retreated a few steps. Only Kieran remained, his eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Marcus Whitlock claimed his daughter was human. He laughed, the sound cold and triumphant. "But she's not human, is she? She's one of us." "Get off my—" Each word from Tobias was a barely leashed growl. For a moment, Sarah thought Kieran would argue, but something in Tobias's expression, something wild and dangerous, made the older alpha reconsider. He bowed mockingly, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "This isn't over, Silvercrest. Blood calls to blood." He gestured to his enforcers, and they melted into the darkness beyond the torchlight. "We'll be in touch regarding proper compensation for your—" Only when Kieran's scent had completely faded from the territory did Tobias release the breath he'd been holding. He looked down at Sarah, and she saw 100 emotions warring in his expression. Shock, protectiveness, and something that looked like wonder. "We need to talk," he said. Tobias led her to a cottage at the edge of the pack grounds, small and isolated, surrounded by old-growth pines. His hand never left the small of her back, and Sarah was grateful for the contact. It was the only thing keeping her grounded as her senses continued to spiral out of control. Inside, he guided her to a chair before crouching in front of her, his hands gentle on her knees. She did. His eyes were still silver but calmer now, searching. He asked quietly, "They said I shifted, but that's impossible. I'm human." Even as she said it, though, doubt crept in. The enhanced senses, the way her body had responded to the claiming bite, the strange connection she felt thrumming between them, none of it felt human. "Your eyes changed when I marked you," Tobias said carefully. "They went amber, full wolf, and your scent—" He closed his eyes briefly. "It's been driving me insane since you arrived. I couldn't figure out what it was. Human, yes, but underneath, wolf." "That's not possible," Sarah whispered. "My mother was human. My father never shifted in front of me, never even suggested—" She stopped, memories flooding back. Her father's paranoia, the way he'd moved them every few years, his insistence that she train in combat but never with other shifters. "A bloodline gift can skip generations," Tobias said. "Or it can be suppressed if the shifter never goes through their first transformation." He sat back on his heels. "The claiming bite is one of the most powerful catalysts in shifter magic. It forces a recognition of what you truly are." Sarah's hands were shaking. Tobias's voice was gentle. "Just She looked down at her hands, half expecting to see claws. They looked the same as always. But inside, something had definitely changed. She could feel it. A presence in her mind that hadn't been there before. Something wild and waiting. Even as she asked, she knew it was a futile question. Tobias moved to sit beside her, close enough that his warmth seeped into her side. Sarah, I need to know. She was human. She died when I was 3. The question hung in the air. Sarah tried to remember her mother's face, her voice, anything concrete. But there was only fragments. Pale hair, a soft laugh, the smell of lavender, and one memory she'd always dismissed as a child's imagination. Her mother's eyes catching the light, flashing gold for just a moment. Oh, gods, Sarah breathed. Tobias's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers. I think your father was protecting you from more than just Kieran. She turned to face him fully. Because true-born wolves, children of 2 shifter parents, are rare. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, and she felt the gesture echo through their bond. The magic runs stronger in them. Their wolves are more dominant, their connection to pack dynamics more intense. You, Sarah, are likely one of the strongest wolves in this territory. The revelation should have terrified her. Instead, pieces began clicking into place. Her unusual speed and reflexes, her father's intensive training, the way she'd always felt slightly apart from fully human company. Even her fierce need for independence might have been her wolf pushing against the suppression. Kieran knows now, she said. Tobias's voice hardened. He won't. His hand tightened on hers. Which is why you're staying here, with me. It wasn't a question. He met her eyes, and she saw the raw honesty there. No. I claimed you because the thought of him taking you made me want to tear the world apart. He paused. And because when I touched you this morning, when I pinned you in that ring, my wolf recognized something I didn't understand yet. Sarah's breath caught. The mate bond. His voice was barely above a whisper. And ours just became active. You feel it too, don't you? The connection. She did. Beneath her own churning emotions, she could sense his fierce protectiveness, wonder, and a desire so intense it made her dizzy. I don't know how to be someone's mate, she admitted. Or a wolf. Tobias lifted their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. I know this isn't the freedom you wanted, Sarah, but I swear to you, I will never be the cage your mother's bond was. Whatever this is between us, we build it together. And despite everything, despite the chaos, the danger, the complete upending of her understanding of herself, Sarah believed him. Chapter 6. Learning to Let Go. Sarah didn't sleep that night. How could she, when every sound was amplified, every shadow seemed alive, and a restless energy coursed through her veins like electricity? Tobias had offered her one of the guest rooms in the cottage, giving her space despite the mate bond humming between them like a live wire. She stood at the window, watching the forest sway in the pre-dawn wind, and tried to make sense of the creature stirring inside her consciousness. Her wolf. It felt foreign and familiar all at once, a presence that had always been there but locked away, and now wanted out with an urgency that made her skin itch. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Sarah? She recognized Tobias's voice even through the door, would have known it was him even without hearing it. The bond told her exactly where he was, could feel his concern like a warm pressure against her chest. He entered carrying 2 steaming mugs, and the smell hit her with unexpected intensity, coffee, cream, and something spiced she couldn't identify. He handed her one, and their fingers brushed. The contact sent a pleasant shiver up her arm. He asked, leaning against the wall beside the window, Everything is so loud. You learn to filter. Right now, your wolf is experiencing everything for the first time. It's overwhelming. He took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim. How are you feeling? Restless, like I need to run for miles or climb something or... She pressed a hand to her sternum where the energy seemed to concentrate. Your wolf wants to shift. Tobias set his mug on the windowsill. We should start training today. The full moon is in 3 days, and if you haven't shifted by then, it'll be... Sarah's stomach clenched. The moon will force the shift whether you're ready or not. His expression softened. I know this is terrifying. Everything you thought you knew about yourself has been turned upside down. But you're not alone in this, Sarah. The promise settled something inside her. She took a shaky breath. They walked into the forest as dawn broke, the world painted in shades of gold and amber. Tobias led her to a clearing she hadn't seen before, a natural amphitheater ringed by ancient trees. The ground was soft with moss, and the air smelled of earth and growing things. This is where pack juveniles come for their first shifts, Tobias explained, shrugging off his jacket. It's protected, private. Sarah's heart hammered. He moved to stand in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. It's not a transformation in the violent, painful way movies portray it. It's a surrender. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Your father taught you to be small, to hide. Now you need to learn to be big, to take up space. The touch sent warmth flooding through her, and she leaned into it before she could stop herself. Through the bond, she felt his approval, his encouragement, and something deeper, a fierce pride in her that made her throat tight. Close your eyes, he murmured. She did. Now feel for that presence inside you, your wolf. Don't fight it. Don't try to control it. Sarah focused inward, past her racing thoughts and pounding heart, down to that wild thing that had been stirring since the claiming bite. There, a consciousness that was hers but not hers, patient and powerful. Good. Now ask it to come forward, not with words, with intention. She reached for it tentatively, and the wolf surged up in response. Sarah gasped as sensation flooded her, the urge to run, to hunt, to howl. Her body began to heat, her bones shifting. Terror slammed through her, and she jerked back, stumbling away from Tobias. The wolf retreated immediately, leaving her shaking and breathless. I can't, she gasped. Tobias was there instantly, hands on her shoulders, grounding her. That was perfect for a first attempt. You made contact. I know. His thumbs rubbed soothing circles on her shoulders. Shifting requires trust, Sarah, not just in the process, but in yourself. What if I do? What if I shift and I'm not? His voice was absolute. But that won't happen. Your wolf isn't separate from you. It's you. Sarah wanted to believe him, but the fear ran deep, carved into her by years of her father's warnings about the dangers of the shifter world, about losing oneself to the beast. Tell me about your first shift, she said suddenly. Tobias's expression flickered with surprise, then something softer. I was 8. He guided her to sit on a fallen log, settling beside her. My father took me to this clearing, actually, told me the same things I'm telling you. Incredible, terrifying. A small smile played at his lips. I shifted and immediately tried to climb a tree, got about 10 feet up before I realized wolves aren't built for climbing and fell on my tail. Despite everything, Sarah felt her own lips curve. He turned to face her fully. The point is, I was clumsy and confused and I made mistakes. But I was still me, still Tobias, just more. That's what your wolf will give you. The sun had risen fully now, warming the clearing. Birds sang in the trees, and somewhere in the distance she heard the sound of running water. The world felt alive in a way it never had before, and Sarah realized with a start that she wasn't just observing it anymore, she was part of it, connected to it in ways humans could never be. She asked quietly. Pride flared through the bond, so strong it made her breath catch. They spent the next 3 hours in the clearing. Each attempt, Sarah got a little further, feeling her bones begin to reshape, her senses sharpening even more, the world shifting toward a different perspective. But each time, fear would spike and she'd pull back, leaving her frustrated and exhausted. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Sarah was sitting on the ground, sweat dampening her hair, every muscle trembling with effort. I don't understand, she said, voice rough. I can feel her right there. She wants this. Tobias sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder pressed against hers. Because letting go means accepting this new reality, and acceptance means acknowledging that everything your father built his life around, protecting you from this, was for nothing. You're not just learning to shift, Sarah. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah's eyes burned, and suddenly she was crying. Great, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Tobias pulled her against his chest without a word, his arms solid and safe around her. He loved you, Tobias murmured into her hair. Everything he did was out of love, but he was wrong to make you fear this part of yourself. The words were muffled against his shirt. Because I can feel what you feel. He pulled back just enough to tilt her face up, brushing tears from her cheeks. But his sacrifice gave you a childhood, Sarah. Years of safety and normalcy. That wasn't for nothing. And now you get to honor his memory by living fully. Something inside her cracked open, not breaking, but releasing. The tight control she'd maintained for so long, the constant vigilance, the endless suppression of anything that might be different or dangerous or wild. It all fell away, and in its place rushed a freedom so intense it stole her breath. I want to try again, she whispered. Tobias smiled, and it transformed his entire face. This time, when Sarah reached for her wolf, she didn't grab. She opened, she surrendered, she trusted, and the world shifted. Chapter 7. Wild Heart. The world fractured into 1,000 sensations. Sarah's scream died in her throat as her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. Every cell knew this transformation, had been coded for it since birth, waiting for permission to become what it was always meant to be. Pain. Yes, but not the agony she'd feared. This was the pain of awakening, of walls crumbling, of a caged thing finally spreading wings it had folded for too long. Don't fight it, Tobias's voice reached her, steady as stone. Let go, Sarah. His presence anchored her as her bones sang a song of change. She felt him shift beside her, heard the rustle of fabric, the whisper of his own transformation. He was doing this with her, not just watching from safety. That trust, that solidarity, gave her the courage to surrender. Her vision sharpened first, colors bleeding away into shades of gray and silver, but somehow more real than they'd ever been. The forest exploded into detail, every leaf distinct, every shadow deep and full of secrets. Then came the scents. Oh God, the scents. The earth beneath her, rich, dark, alive with the decomposition of a million fallen things returning to the soil. The trees, each species distinct, pine sharp and clean, oak deep and ancient, birch sweet and young. And Tobias, his scent wrapped around her like a blanket, wild and warm and fundamentally safe. When the change finally completed, Sarah stood on 4 legs, her white coat gleaming in the dappled moonlight filtering through the canopy. The wolf beside her was massive, russet and gold and powerful. His amber eyes held recognition, pride, and something else. Something that made her newly enhanced senses tingle with awareness. You're beautiful, his thoughts touched hers. Clear as speech but deeper, more fundamental. The mate bond hummed between them. No longer just a human understanding, but a lived reality sung through every fiber of her being. Sarah took a tentative step, then another. Her body moved with an instinctive grace she'd never possessed as a human. 4 legs felt as natural as 2, more natural perhaps. This form didn't stumble or hesitate. It knew. Tobias moved beside her, his larger frame a comforting presence. Follow me. Stay close. Let your instincts guide you. They moved through the forest, and Sarah discovered joy in the simple act of running. Her paws found purchase on uneven ground without thought. Her muscles bunched and released with perfect efficiency. The wind rushed through her fur, carrying messages written in scent and sound. A rabbit 30 yards east. A stream bubbling over stones somewhere ahead. An owl watching from an old oak with amber eyes that matched Tobias's. This, she thought, and felt him catch the emotion through their bond. This is what I was missing. Not just the shift itself, but the wholeness of it. She wasn't a human pretending to be a wolf. She wasn't a wolf pretending to be human. She was both, fully integrated for the first time in her life. Tobias led her to a clearing where moonlight pooled like liquid silver. He shifted back, the change as fluid as water, and she felt the pull to follow. This time, the transformation came easier, her body already learning the rhythm of change. She stumbled as her human legs returned, and Tobias caught her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders with practiced ease. He'd brought supplies, she realized, had planned for this moment with characteristic thoughtfulness. His voice was rough with emotion. She was shaking, not from cold or fear, but from the overwhelm of sensation still echoing through her nervous system. I felt everything, the forest, the wind. I could smell the mountains and taste the air, and she broke off, laughing breathlessly. He wrapped his own blanket around his shoulders, settling beside her on the forest floor. Your senses were awakening after being dormant. It'll become more manageable with practice, but you'll never lose that awareness completely. I could feel you, she said softly. Your thoughts, your emotions. Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to read. The mate bond intensifies in wolf form. Sarah studied him in the moonlight, seeing him with new eyes. Not just the alpha who'd been helping her, not just the man who made her heart race, but her mate, the other half of a bond she was only beginning to understand. D. The question emerged before she could stop it. The bond, I mean. You've known about it longer. You felt it while I was still. Tobias was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the stars wheeling overhead. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. It's like having a compass that always points home, knowing where you are, what you're feeling. He looked at her then, amber eyes serious. Because you deserve the chance to choose this for yourself, not have it forced on you by biology or circumstance. Your father kept you from your wolf to protect you. The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the careful control he'd been exercising all along. The patience, the restraint, the way he'd never pushed or demanded despite the bond singing between them. Tobias, a howl split the night, distant but clear. Not Tobias's pack. The tone was wrong, aggressive, and challenging. Tobias was on his feet in an instant, his body going rigid. That's Garrett's wolves. His eyes found hers, urgent. Can you shift again? We need to get back to the cabin. Chapter 8. Pack Dynamics. Sarah's second shift came faster than the first, her body already remembering the path. Within moments, she ran beside Tobias through the darkened forest, his larger form cutting a trail she could follow. But everything felt different now. The joy of her first run was overshadowed by the tension radiating from Tobias through their bond. A tight, controlled fury that made her wolf instincts prickle with awareness. Stay behind me, his mental voice commanded. If I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. I'm not leaving you to face. Sarah! The alpha authority in his tone made her wolf want to submit, but the human part of her bristled. I need to know you're safe. Please. The please did what the command couldn't. She sent her agreement through the bond, feeling his gratitude like warmth against her skin. They reached the cabin clearing to find 3 wolves waiting. 2 were large males, 1 gray, 1 dark brown, flanking a smaller but no less dangerous-looking female with a reddish coat. All 3 had their attention fixed on the cabin's porch, where Marcus stood in human form, arms crossed. Tobias shifted as they emerged from the trees, and Sarah followed suit, grateful when he immediately moved to shield her with his body. She clutched the blanket he'd grabbed from where they'd stashed them. Tobias's voice carried absolute authority. The gray wolf shifted, revealing a man in his 40s with silver threading through dark hair and cold blue eyes. Just checking on our newest pack member. Heard there was a successful first shift tonight. The way he said her name made her skin crawl. She's under my protection, Tobias said quietly. Garrett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Interesting word choice. The warning in Tobias's voice made the other 2 wolves shift restlessly. You're on pack lands without permission, addressing my... He paused almost imperceptibly. My responsibility with disrespect. Garrett spread his hands in mock innocence. I'm being neighborly. The girl's father died under suspicious circumstances. She appears on your doorstep. You invoke protection rights for a wolf you'd never met before. Surely you can understand my... Sarah felt Tobias's anger spike through the bond, but his expression remained neutral. Her father's death was ruled accidental by the human authorities and the pack council. The female wolf, still in animal form, circled closer, her eyes fixed on Sarah with unsettling intensity. Marcus's voice cut through the tension. You've delivered whatever message Garrett sent you to deliver. Diane's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, but she retreated to Garrett's side. We just want to make sure everything's... Garrett's gaze moved between Tobias and Sarah, assessing. A dormant wolf suddenly awakening. A mate bond forming so conveniently. Your father's timing in claiming protection. Some might wonder why you're so interested in my pack's business, Tobias countered. We've coexisted peacefully for 20 years, Garrett. Garrett took a step forward, and immediately Marcus and Tobias both moved, Marcus descending from the porch, Tobias's stance shifting into something more overtly aggressive. Thomas Winters died 3 weeks ago in what authorities called a hiking accident. 1 week later, his daughter appears seeking the alpha of the neighboring territory. 2 weeks after that, she's shifting and bonded. I find your presence on my land at midnight suspicious, Tobias said coldly. I find your interest in a newly shifted wolf under protection suspicious. I find your implications about pack business suspicious. Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't known that detail, that her father had specifically arranged for Tobias to protect her. The letter had mentioned protection, but not that he'd made formal arrangements. Garrett noticed her reaction. Didn't know that part? Interesting. Tobias's voice dropped to a growl that vibrated through the clearing. For a long moment, the two alphas stared at each other, a contest of wills that made the air itself feel heavy. Finally, Garrett smiled coldly. We'll be watching, he said. Whatever game you're playing, Tobias, it involves my territory too. Thomas Winters died on the border between our lands. He shifted without waiting for a response, his two companions following suit. Within moments, they'd melted into the forest, 3 shadows disappearing into darkness. The silence they left behind felt suffocating. Inside, Marcus said quietly. Tobias turned to Sarah, his expression unreadable. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. What did he mean about my father's death? Inside first, Tobias repeated, his hand gentle at the small of her back, guiding her toward the cabin. Then we'll talk. But as Sarah climbed the porch steps, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just glimpsed the edge of something much larger, a secret that involved not just her father's death, but the careful way Tobias had been protecting her. And possibly why someone might want her father dead in the first place. The mate bond hummed between them, but for the first time since awakening it, Sarah wondered what truths Tobias was keeping locked behind his careful control. Chapter 9. Revealed Truths. The cabin's warmth felt stifling after the cool night air. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around herself, hyper-aware of Marcus moving to secure the windows, while Tobias stood with his back to her, staring into the fireplace's dying embers. The silence stretched until she couldn't bear it anymore. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The letter just said to find you. Spis. Tobias's shoulders tensed. When he turned to face her, his expression was carefully guarded, the same look he'd worn when they first met, like he was calculating how much truth to reveal. The word surprised them both with its vehemence. Don't hide from me now. Not after everything. I felt you tonight, Tobias. Through the bond. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. He nodded slowly. You're right. He gestured to the couch. Sit. Marcus returned from checking the perimeter, catching the tail end of the conversation. He asked Tobias quietly. She needs to know. The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Tobias settled into the chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Your father didn't die in a hiking accident. We suspected it from the beginning, but we couldn't prove anything. Sarah's breath caught. Tobias's jaw tightened. Your father was a researcher, Sarah. Not just of environmental science, but of shifter genetics. The world seemed to tilt. Thomas wasn't just trying to protect you by keeping you dormant, Marcus interjected, his voice gentle. He was trying to understand why some wolves go dormant in the first place. Sarah's hands clenched in the blanket. Tobias met her gaze steadily. Because according to his research, dormancy only occurs in wolves descended from the original pack founders. The implications hit her like a physical blow. You're saying I'm descended from one of the founding families, Tobias confirmed, which means your wolf isn't just powerful, Sarah, it's valuable. Garrett, she breathed. Garrett's family has been trying to prove their lineage to the founding packs for 3 generations, Marcus explained. If they could prove it, they'd have a legitimate claim to territory expansion, increased status in the council. But the records are incomplete. Your father's research threatened to expose which lines were genuine and which were. Sarah's mind raced, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. We don't know for certain it was Garrett, Tobias said carefully. But your father's death occurred on the border between our territories, technically in neutral ground, but close enough to both that either pack could claim jurisdiction. The timing was suspicious. You knew, Sarah whispered. From the beginning. You knew what I was, what my father had been researching. Guilt flashed across Tobias's face. Your father sent me his research 2 months before he died. He was worried, said he'd discovered something that put you in danger. He asked me to protect you if anything happened to him, to help you awaken your wolf safely. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. I should have told you sooner. I wanted to wait until you were stronger, until you'd shifted and could defend yourself if needed. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Tobias exchanged a glance with Marcus before answering. He found evidence that one of the current alpha lines, either mine or Garrett's, isn't legitimate, that somewhere in the past 200 years there was a break in the true bloodline. The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a shroud. He didn't tell me which line, Tobias continued. Either he hadn't finished verifying his findings, or he was protecting the information until he could present it properly to the council. But someone found out what he was researching. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the careful control in a new light. You think it might be your line, she said softly. That's why you've been so careful with me. Then I have no right to be alpha, Tobias finished quietly. No right to claim pack lands or invoke protection rights or. He stopped abruptly, but Sarah heard what he didn't say, or claim a mate bond. But you did it anyway, she said. His amber eyes held hers. Because your father trusted me with your life. He hesitated, vulnerability cracking through his careful facade. Because the moment I saw you, I knew I couldn't let anything happen to you. The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. Here was the truth she'd been sensing beneath his restraint. Not reluctance to accept their bond, but fear that he had no right to it. She asked. Chapter 10. Hidden Research. Sleep proved impossible. Sarah lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling as her mind churned through everything Tobias had revealed. Every creak of the cabin made her pulse spike. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Around 3 a.m, she gave up and padded downstairs in bare feet, wrapped in an oversized sweater she'd borrowed from Marcus. The living room was dark except for the glow of a laptop screen where Tobias sat hunched over the coffee table, surrounded by papers and file folders. He looked up as she approached, and even in the dim light she could see the exhaustion etched into his features. She asked softly. He gestured at the mess of documents. Your father's research. Sarah settled onto the couch beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The mate bond hummed with awareness, stronger now after her shift. She could feel his exhaustion, his worry, his fierce determination to protect her even at the cost of his own position. Tobias studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Actually, yes. You might recognize something I wouldn't. These are your father's personal notes, not the formal research papers he was preparing for the council. His handwriting, his shorthand. He handed her a leather journal, worn soft with use. Sarah's throat tightened as she recognized her father's familiar scrawl across the first page. Dated entries, genetic diagrams, fragments of pack histories copied from various sources. They worked in companionable silence, the only sounds the rustle of paper and the occasional crackle from the fireplace Marcus must have stoked before going to bed. Sarah found herself hyper-aware of Tobias beside her, the warmth of his body, the subtle shift of his breathing, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. Here, she said after nearly an hour, her finger tracing a margin note. Tobias went very still. I think so. She pointed to a timeline her father had sketched. He's tracking alpha successions. She squinted at the faded writing. Jonathan Thorne was my great-great-great-grandfather, Tobias said slowly. He became alpha in 1843 after the previous alpha died without heirs. Sarah read further. Dad's written something here about a fire. The implications hung heavy between them. My family has always maintained that the previous Alpha's children died in that fire, Tobias said quietly, that Jonathan was the only surviving heir. Sarah looked at him, seeing the pain in his expression. His voice was rough. If it's true, then it needs to come out. He met her eyes. The raw honesty in his words made something crack open in Sarah's chest. Here was a man who could have hidden this research, could have destroyed it to protect his position and power. Instead, he was actively searching for proof that might strip him of his title. "You're a good man," she said softly. "A good Alpha." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. "What if being Alpha is all I am? What if without that legitimacy I'm just—" "You're still you," Sarah interrupted, reaching for his hand without thinking. Their fingers intertwined, and the mate bond flared with warmth. "You're still the man who protected me when you had every reason not to, who helped me find my wolf." Tobias stared at their joined hands, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in an unconscious caress. "The bond," he said quietly. "If I'm not a legitimate Alpha, it might not even be real. Mate bonds are tied to pack magic, to bloodline recognition." Sarah shifted closer, using her free hand to turn his face toward hers. "I felt that bond before I knew anything about Alpha lines or pack politics. I felt it as a human with a dormant wolf. Whatever this is between us, it's real." Her voice was fierce. "You've been protecting me, giving me space to choose, worried that the bond might be forcing something I don't want. But I'm choosing now, Tobias. I'm choosing to trust this. To trust you." For a long moment, he simply looked at her, amber eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. Then slowly he leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. She smiled despite the gravity of their situation. Tobias laughed, a short, surprised sound that transformed his face. "Both?" They returned to the research, but something had shifted between them. The careful distance Tobias had maintained was gone, replaced by an easy intimacy that felt right. Their shoulders pressed together as they bent over documents. His hand found hers during particularly difficult passages. And when Sarah's eyes started to droop near dawn, he pulled her against his side without hesitation. "Rest," he murmured. But even as sleep pulled her under, Sarah's mind caught on one final detail from her father's notes, a name circled multiple times with urgent question marks beside it. Garrett Thorne. Not Garrett of a rival pack. Garrett Thorne. The same surname as Tobias's family. Whatever her father had discovered, it connected both Alphas in ways that made his death even more sinister than they'd realized.